old black man stood silently in the courtroom accused of trespassing. No lawyer, no defense, only a judge staring down at him with contempt, seeing nothing more than a worthless vagrant. But with just one phone call, the old man would turn the entire courtroom on its head, revealing a truth no one saw coming. How could someone society deemed insignificant prove that justice isn't always what it seems? Leave a comment below. Do you believe justice is truly blind, or does it favor the powerful? Now, let's dive into this incredible story. The heavy wooden doors of the Jefferson County Courthouse creaked open with a long, piercing sound, echoing through the vast courtroom like a warning. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, slicing sharp beams of light across rows of polished mahogany benches and glinting off the brass fixtures. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, varnish, and the suffocating weight of lives waiting to be judged. At the judge's bench sat Gregory Vaughn, a man whose mere presence seemed to chill the air. 60 years old, silver hair slicked back perfectly, his icy blue eyes devoid of compassion. The black robe draped over him like armor. To Vaughn, the law wasn't a shield. It was a blade. Cold, precise, meant to strike. He brought the gavel down twice, the sound sharp, echoing like a blade slicing through the silence. "Next case," Vaughn growled, his voice cutting through the heavy air like a knife. The double doors creaked again as they opened wide, and in walked an elderly black man, Thomas Grayson. 75 years old, his back bent slightly under the weight of years, but his steps slow and steady. Every scuff on his worn leather shoes told a story of miles traveled, not just on the road, but through the storms of life. Thomas wore a faded flannel shirt, buttoned neatly though the fabric was frayed. His dark slacks were patched at the knees. Weathered skin bore deep lines, each wrinkle carved by years of hard labor and countless struggles. In his calloused hands, he clutched an old cloth cap like a shield, but his eyes, sharp and bright, burned like embers beneath the ash of time. Whispers slithered through the courtroom. Another homeless old man. What a waste of time. Probably begging for pity again. The cruel words slithered like venomous snakes, creeping through the pews, poisoning the heavy air. Yet Thomas stood still, unmoved. He'd heard it all before. Every sneer, every mocking smile, they were as familiar to him as the calluses on his hands. Vaughn's icy gaze pierced through him, judging him as less than nothing. "Thomas Grayson," he drawled, heavy with disdain. 75 years old, charged with trespassing, yet again. Papers rustled as the young assistant prosecutor, Evelyn Price, stood. Her voice was cold, clear, merciless. "Your Honor, the defendant was found sitting by the private lake inside Willow Creek Estates, a gated, high-end community. This is his second offense in 6 months. Security asked him to leave. He refused. Police were called and Mr. Grayson was arrested." She placed the file down with a thud that echoed in the tense silence. "The state is pursuing charges under trespassing law, Your Honor." A heavy pause filled the room, broken only by the ticking of an old clock. Vaughn exhaled sharply, his boredom and disdain clear. "Let me get this straight," he sneered slowly, almost mockingly. "You got caught trespassing again?" His tone made Thomas's alleged crime sound like the gravest sin. Thomas lifted his head, his voice low but steady. "Yes, sir." "Then what the hell were you doing there?" Vaughn's brow arched, his voice dripping with contempt. Thomas calmly met his gaze, unwavering. "I was sitting by the lake. That place, it means something to me." The courtroom erupted in cruel laughter. Vaughn smirked, a sharp, cold laugh slicing through the room. "The lake? You mean their lake? The one they paid for?" Thomas said nothing. He didn't need to. "You see, Grayson," Vaughn leaned forward, his words like venom. "Men like you always fool yourselves. You think just because you have memories tied to a place, it still belongs to you. The world doesn't work like that, old man." Thomas stood still, breathing slowly, his hands tightening around the old cap. Vaughn flipped through the file, sneering. "You've stood here before, haven't you? 6 months ago, same charge, trespassing at Westbrook Country Club, and now it's Willow Creek Estates. Seems you enjoy hanging around places that don't belong to you, huh?" He slammed the file shut, the sound sharp, like a verdict being delivered. "Tell me, Grayson," Vaughn lowered his voice, colder than ice, "what gives you the right to trample the law, to walk onto someone else's land as if it were your own. Thomas drew a deep breath and answered, his voice soft but cutting through the thick air like a blade. I never said it was mine, Your Honor, but it used to be where I belonged. For a fleeting second, hesitation flickered in Vaughn's eyes, but just as quickly the cold returned. The world doesn't run on memories, old man, Vaughn sneered, mocking. The law doesn't care if you once fished there or walked there. The law is the law. And men like you always think life's unfair and use that as an excuse to trample it. The courtroom fell silent. Thomas didn't protest. He'd heard words like these his whole life. From teachers, bosses, the fearful stares of strangers, the unjust stops by police on quiet streets. Vaughn leaned back, smirking. Do you have an attorney, Grayson? No, Your Honor. Vaughn let out a cruel laugh. Of course you don't. Evelyn Price hesitated, then spoke carefully. Given his age and the nature of the offense, the prosecution recommends a fine or community service. Vaughn scoffed, sneering. A fine? Picking up trash by the road? What could someone like him possibly learn from that? His voice grew sharp, each word deliberate. There need to be real consequences. Raising his gavel high, Vaughn declared, I sentence Thomas Grayson to 30 days in jail. The sound echoed, like a crack of thunder splitting the dark sky. The courtroom froze. Gasps, murmurs, and disbelieving sighs rippled through the room. Evelyn froze, her lips parting as if to object, but no sound came. Her hands trembled as she gripped the file, knuckles white. No one could believe it. An old, frail man sentenced to jail for sitting by a lake. Thomas lowered his eyes. No words, no tears. All emotion seemed frozen in that moment. The old man stood still, but deep in his eyes a fire burned. It was the quiet rage of a man belittled his entire life. Court is adjourned, Vaughn slammed his gavel once more, the sound arrogant, final. The shuffle of the officer's boots echoed as he approached Thomas to escort him away. The room filled with the sounds of heavy sighs, papers rustling, a mournful symphony for an old man's fate. In Thomas Grayson's silent gaze, he knew this wasn't justice. This was a sentence passed down for his skin, his past, his poverty, and more than ever, Thomas understood he wasn't being judged for trespassing, but for existing. Beneath the cold, yellow courtroom lights, the air turned to ice after Vaughn's arrogant sentence. Silence engulfed the room, broken only by the clerk's keyboard clicks and the faint whistle of wind sneaking through old window cracks. Thomas Grayson stood motionless, his silver hair falling over his gaunt face, fists clenched. Despite the 30-day sentence for sitting by a lake that once belonged to him, he didn't bow his head. His eyes met Vaughn's, not with fear, not with despair, but with a terrifying calm, as if he knew. The real storm hadn't even begun. And then, bang. The heavy wooden doors suddenly burst open, the sound shattering the gloom. Heads snapped toward the door as gasps swept the room like a rising wave. From the doorway stepped a woman, tall, graceful, her black suit hugging her frame like battle armor. Every step of her sharp heels on the wooden floor echoed click, click, click. Cold, decisive, her eyes sharp as blades cut through the air as she strode forward, commanding the entire courtroom's attention. Margaret Grayson, Thomas's only daughter, one of the city's most powerful attorneys and businesswomen, had arrived. Gregory Vaughn flinched, a chill racing down his spine as if drenched in ice water. He struggled to maintain composure, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped his chair. Margaret stopped in the center of the courtroom, her gaze locked directly on Vaughn, perched smugly behind his bench. Her voice rang out, cold, steady, dripping with authority. I am Margaret Grayson. Perhaps, Judge Vaughn, you should review these documents before having my father dragged away like a criminal. Her words sliced through the air like a blade. Vaughn raised an eyebrow, scoffing mockingly. You think a few pieces of paper will change this sentence? This court is adjourned. I am under no obligation to hear anything from you. Margaret didn't flinch. Calmly, she placed her heavy leather briefcase on the table with a thud, a sound that landed like a challenge. Slowly, she opened it and pulled out a thick stack of documents, stamped in bold red by the Supreme Court and top legal agencies. You will want to read this before you make another mistake, Your Honor, she said, her voice like ice, her eyes drilling into Vaughn, making him flinch ever so slightly. Gregory Vaughn snatched the file from Margaret's hands, flipping it open with clear reluctance. But the moment his eyes scanned the first lines, his face turned pale as death. His eyes widened, lips trembled, and his fingers gripped the file so tightly the papers nearly tore. The air in the courtroom was sucked dry. Everyone held their breath, their eyes glued to Vaughn's face, watching every flicker of emotion crack his once impenetrable mask. Prosecutor Evelyn Price stood frozen, her hand gripping her thin case file so tightly her knuckles turned bone-white. Everything she'd just done felt meaningless now. Margaret pressed her lips together, eyes cold and unyielding like a judge delivering a sentence. She took one step closer and spoke, every word sharp, deliberate. "In your hands, Judge Vaughn, are the legal documents proving that Clearwater Lake and all surrounding land legally belong to Thomas Grayson and have for the past 35 years. He was never trespassing. He was standing on his own land." The courtroom exploded into gasps and frantic whispers. A reporter at the back fumbled for his phone, fingers trembling as he typed, the story already spreading like wildfire. Margaret's voice cut through the chaos, icy and precise. "And that's not all. You'll also find records of Mr. Grayson's annual contributions, over $2 million in the last 10 years, to this very courthouse. And Judge Vaughn, perhaps you should check who funded the chair you're sitting in." Gregory Vaughn's head snapped up, sweat beating at his temple. His mouth opened, but no words came. The name Thomas Grayson screamed from every page, every red-stamped seal, each one striking like a hammer against Vaughn's pride and crumbling power. Slowly, Thomas Grayson rose to his feet. His gaze was calm, but deep within his eyes burned the fury of a man who had endured a lifetime of injustice. He locked eyes with Vaughn, his voice deep, heavy with the weight of years. "What now, Judge Vaughn? Do you still see me as a man who knows nothing of the law, a trespasser?" No one dared speak. No one dared laugh. The courtroom suffocated in a silence heavier than stone, the silence of something crumbling, of truth buried beneath power and prejudice finally clawing its way to the surface. Gregory Vaughn sat frozen, his trembling fingers tapping weakly against the wooden bench, as if grasping for one last shred of authority. But it was useless. Margaret turned, gently resting a hand on her father's shoulder, her voice soft but commanding. "Dad, let's go. No one here dares hold you any longer." And then, in the resounding echo of their footsteps, father and daughter walked out of that courtroom, leaving behind a broken Gregory Vaughn and a crumbling legal system laid bare for all to see. That day, New York buzzed, not over a sentence, but over the fall of a once untouchable judge, and it all began with a single phone call and the arrival of Margaret Grayson. Under the dim yellow lights of the New York courtroom, the air grew thick, suffocating, heavy enough to crush the lungs. Silence gripped the room, broken only by the cold tick of the wall clock, counting down the final moments of a man's fall from power. Judge Gregory Vaughn, once the self-proclaimed symbol of justice, sat stiff in his gleaming leather chair, his eyes locked on the thick file before him, every word, every blood-red seal carved deep into his pride, like a blade peeling away the facade of a man who once held lives in his hands. Margaret's voice rang out, sharp, commanding, like a church bell tolling for the guilty. "Judge Vaughn, this wasn't just a mistake. You sentenced a man on land he owns, a man who funded this courthouse with millions. And worse, you did it because you assumed he was just a poor black man." Her words cracked through the air like a whip, leaving Vaughn's face twitching with rage and shame. The entire courtroom sat paralyzed. Evelyn Price, once proud, sharp, now lowered her head, lips pressed tight, her face pale as ash. No one moved, no one breathed, eyes locked on Margaret and Vaughn. Vaughn swallowed hard, throat dry as sand. He flipped through the file with trembling hands, sweat dripping down his temple. Each page screamed of the truth, the money, the ownership, the undeniable power of Thomas Grayson. Finally, Thomas lifted his gaze. The eyes of a man who had endured, who had been spat on by life, now staring down the man who once sneered at him. He smiled, not in triumph but in exhaustion, the kind of smile that comes when there's nothing left to fight, only truth standing bare. "Anything left to say, Gregory Vaughn?" Margaret's words hit like a final blow. Vaughn opened his mouth, but no sound came. His throat clenched tight. All those years on his high bench, laughing, sentencing people with a cold gavel strike, and now he was the one laid bare. stripped, humiliated. At the back, a young reporter fumbled with his recorder, the screen lighting up with breaking news. Judge Gregory Vaughn, the man who sentenced the very benefactor of his court, the scandal of the year. Gregory's head snapped up, eyes wild, tracking every movement of the reporters closing in, pens and cameras ready to capture his downfall. He knew. It was over. His career, his power, his name, all of it, finished. Margaret took a step forward, pointing directly at Gregory Vaughn, her voice ringing through the courtroom. "You don't need to destroy your own career, Gregory Vaughn. You've already done that yourself." The murmurs rolled through the courtroom like waves crashing against the shore. Everyone knew history was being rewritten right here, right now. Suddenly, Vaughn shot to his feet, his leather chair crashing against the marble floor with a deafening thud. His face flushed crimson, veins bulging as his eyes blazed with fury, his fists clenched so tightly they trembled. "Shut up, all of you, shut your damn mouths," he roared, his voice breaking apart, laced with bitterness and despair. But no one feared Gregory Vaughn anymore. A man in a black suit and glasses strode in, raising a summons from the High Judicial Council. His voice was steady, cold, leaving no room for doubt. "Judge Gregory Vaughn, you are officially under investigation for bias, abuse of power, and unlawful sentencing. You are ordered to step down immediately. All rulings today are hereby void." The room erupted. Gregory Vaughn staggered back as if struck. His eyes darted desperately between Margaret and Thomas Grayson, silently pleading for escape. But it was far too late. Thomas stood tall, slowly walking past Vaughn. He paused, his calm gaze falling on the pale, crumbling man who once humiliated him. Thomas spoke, his voice deep, steady like the toll of a church bell. "I've waited my whole life for this day. Thank you, Gregory Vaughn, for proving that even the mighty must bow their heads eventually." And then, bathed in the fading golden light streaming through the dusty windows, Thomas Grayson and Margaret walked out, heads high, steps steady, leaving behind a shattered Gregory Vaughn, crumbling in the very courtroom he once ruled. Outside, the city buzzed with breaking news. Headlines splashed across screens and newspapers. Judge Gregory Vaughn, once a symbol of justice, exposed, disgraced, and ruined. The scandal swept through New York like a tornado, tearing apart Vaughn's career and reputation within hours. News outlets lit up with headlines sharp enough to cut through the last remnants of Vaughn's pride. Judge sentences his own court's largest benefactor, racial bias exposed. Former NASA engineer, landowner, wrongfully convicted for the color of his skin. Social media exploded. Leaked videos from the courtroom went viral. Vaughn's pale face, Thomas Grayson's furious eyes, Margaret's razor-sharp voice, all shared at lightning speed. The gavel Vaughn once slammed down became the sound of his own downfall. Thousands of comments flooded in. Blind justice, more like selectively blind. He thought Mr. Grayson was just another homeless black man. Turns out he funded the court he sentenced him in. Outside the federal courthouse, reporters swarmed like vultures, flashes lighting the sky. Everyone fought for a word from Margaret Grayson, the woman who stood tall and reclaimed justice for her father. Margaret emerged, cold smile on her lips, eyes sharp as blades. Beside her, Thomas Grayson walked slowly, his back straight, his eyes calm, a man who had waited his whole life for this moment. Cameras clicked, microphones thrust forward. A reporter shouted, "Ms. Grayson, how does it feel to bring down a judge like Vaughn?" Margaret paused, glancing at her father before answering, her voice slicing through the noise. "We didn't bring him down. The truth did. The justice Vaughn preached was just a mask for his prejudice and arrogance." Applause erupted from the crowd outside, from those once silenced by the system, now watching a black man like Thomas Grayson stand tall in the storm. On every screen, Vaughn's disgraced face became the symbol of a rotten justice system. Looped clips showed him trembling, flipping through the damning evidence, his eyes vacant, haunted. By nightfall, the FBI launched a full investigation. They raided Vaughn's home, exposing every hidden corner of his corrupt past. Allegations of bribery, favoritism, and personal vendettas poured out. A young reporter, breathless with excitement, declared live on air, "No one ever imagined the courthouse, once seen as untouchable, would become the center of the decade's biggest scandal. And no one imagined the spark would come from a 76-year-old black man the system tried to erase." Online, Justice for Grayson trended #1 in hours. People shared Thomas Grayson's story as a beacon of resilience, of truth clawing its way back into the light. Thomas sat quietly in his small living room, eyes red but shining with quiet pride, as he watched the world finally speak his name. Margaret placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her voice soft. "See, Dad? The whole world knows who you are now." Outside, the first winter rain fell, drops shattering on cold concrete. But inside Thomas Grayson's heart, it was warm. A lifetime of waiting, finally worth it. He nodded slowly, his voice gravelly but firm. Justice may come late, but when it comes, men like Gregory Vaughn will never stand tall again. And so it was. Vaughn's career ended that very moment, suspended under criminal investigation, a national disgrace. While Thomas Grayson, once dismissed as a nameless old black man, became a symbol, a living reminder. Never judge a man by his skin, his age, or his clothes. Life is cruel. Society judges by appearances, by circumstance. But Thomas Grayson's story proved a man's true worth is in what he's done, what he's endured, what he's given. Years of hard labor, sacrifice, and silence, all ignored because of his color, his age. But he taught us this: truth endures. Justice, though late, will come, and the light will shine on those the world tried to forget. At an age when most would fade quietly, Thomas stood, fought, reclaimed his name, his honor, his life. The lesson is simple: never let anyone or this world decide your worth. As long as you breathe, you have the right to demand respect, to demand justice. To every elder who hears this, remember, your life, your experience, your legacy are your greatest weapons, and someday even the arrogant will bow. Don't keep this story to yourself. Like it, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories that challenge perspectives and inspire change. Your support means everything. It helps us create powerful content that sparks conversations and makes a difference.